It's a place that people can feel that they can be themselves and realize their dream. But what we've learned is it goes much deeper than what we found on paper. Noosa has an incredible soul, and we want to work with you on that. We want to work with you to better understand it and understand its key components, to kind of unearth it, if you will. We all know it's there, but to put better parameters on it, to better understand what makes that soul, to help us understand it and communicate it. It's a place that's truly authentic. It's a place that cares about the environment, which is so important. It's a place that cares about people. It's a place that wants everyone to be able to achieve. And what we've learned is that, and as Mayor Abbott said, it's a great place to live, it's a great place to visit, it has to also be a great place to work. And in building that kind of work community and working with Stockwell and working over the next year with our Catalyst process, we're going to try to identify 30 people, hopefully you, 30 people who will come together and work for a year to come up. And we're not consultants. We don't care about consulting. We're not going to tell you what to do. We can't tell you what to do. It took me 30 years to realize that. Only you can do. And so we're going to work and define 30 catalysts, and not just the usual suspects, not just the usual leaders and economic leaders and civic leaders and business leaders. People, the kind of people we met today on the beach. People who work in surfing and work in dance and culture, kinds of work in the food industry, who care about this, and we have to reach out and involve them and bring them in and come up with some really interesting initiatives, come up with some amazing initiatives that the community, and I think Mayor Abbott said it so nicely, with all of the political processes you're going through, with all of the changes you're going through, a void may be emerging. And in that void or in that vacuum, it's just what an opportunity that we've come together at this time. In that vacuum that seems to be emerging, this catalyst process can create an energy, can create an enormous energy which says, in Noosa now, we can take control of our destiny, we can show the entire region, not just the region, we can show the state, we can show Queensland, not just Queensland, actually, I'm dreaming, show Australia, not just Australia, we can distill some principles. And I'll tell you what the ideas I have in mind. These are just suggestions. Creative, sustainable, and inclusive. Do you know a place like that? Have you seen a place like that around the world? Have you seen a place when you go and travel throughout Asia, throughout this country, in North America, do you see a place that's creative? There are a few. There's a Silicon Valley. There's a Hollywood. Peter's doing it in Wellington. Yeah, creative. Oh, but is it inclusive? Is it the kind of place that isn't divided between the rich and the poor? Is it inclusive where everyone shares in that? And is it sustainable? Imagine that kind of, the world desperately needs it because, you know, our national politicians in our country, in your country, they don't get it. It's going to come from the mayors and the councilors. It's going to come from the people to develop this new model. Well, anyway, I'm just looking over here at the lovely clock on the stage, and I know I'm already over time, and I just want to tell you, and we have time for questions, so please feel free to fire away. I just want to end on a story, which I think this story communicates the ideas of what we're trying to do here, what my work and our team's work is about, better than the facts and the figures and the statistics. Well, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer, maybe 10 years ago, I went to visit Seattle. It was my first visit to Seattle. I'd heard about the high-tech companies, I'd heard about Nirvana and the music scene. I went to visit Seattle and I saw this great piece of architecture in construction. It was this kind of swoopy building. It had scaffolding around it. It was kind of amazing. I learned that it was a Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry was building this building, the great architect. Canadian architect, by the way, from Toronto. And I said, well, what is this building? It's so amazing. And they said, that's what Paul's building for the town. Paul, great, Paul. Paul who? This is what Paul Allen is building for his hometown. Paul, they said, is the co-founder, the co-organizer of Microsoft with Bill Gates. Together, they met, they dropped out, the college dropouts, they dropped out of college. They decided they'd make this software company. And they eventually, after being in San Francisco and being in New Mexico, they moved back home to where they grew up, Seattle, because they loved their town and the waterfront. They said, this is what Paul's doing for town. I said, oh, Paul's done pretty good. They said, yeah, you know, he's worth several billion. And I thought to myself, well, Paul Allen, what would he be doing for his town? He's a great computer programmer, the greatest software developer, one of the greatest software developers of our time. I said, so he's a scientific mind. This guy is a genius. Has to be something like a science center, Seattle Science Center, Einstein and the great physicist and computer science. They said, no, no, no. It's not a science center, has nothing to do with Einstein, completely different. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, science, kind of what Paul did, but he's a college dropout. He's more an inventor type. He's more a hands-on inventor technology type. He's building like a center for invention and engineering. Thomas Edison, inventor, the light bulb, the phonograph, all of that. No, it's not a center for invention, home-based invention. Not a center for kids who get involved in invention. Okay. I figure now I got one guess left. He's richer than God, right? So this is like the Center for Entrepreneurship, How to Get Rich, How to Make Your Pile, Robber Baron Institute of Seattle. They're like, no. So now I'm out of guesses. What is he doing? And maybe you know what he's doing. They said, oh, this is what Paul's about. The Jimi Hendrix Experience Music Project. The world's first center. Technology, digital, all of this to really emulate, to celebrate the life of Jimi Hendrix, a kid from Seattle, my boyhood idol, the person I wanted to be like. The music I tried to play as a young kid in my parents' basement. You see, it wasn't a great scientist or a great inventor or a rich guy who motivated Paul Allen, was it? He built the thing to emulate, to celebrate the life of the person who truly stimulated him, a young black musician from a ghetto in Seattle who picked up a guitar and started to hear music in a new way. And he listened to blues, and he listened to soul and R&B, and he listened to John Coltrane and jazz, and he heard music and the guitar in a new way. Just like Paul Allen began to hear and see software code in a new way. And he put that together, and he blended it. He moved outside his realm. He listened to Bob Dylan. He loved Bob Dylan. He covered Bob Dylan's song. If you think about Jimi Hendrix for a minute, he actually tried to look like Bob Dylan. He emulated Bob's suits and his hairstyle, that kind of hair that Bob wore. He then moved to England. He took two British bandmates, Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell. He listened to psychedelic music. He loved the Beatles. He covered the Beatles songs. He played and he combined that music. He actually went back and he worked and he lived in Nashville. He learned country music and he put it all together. And he built this little three-piece band. And then he started to experiment not only with music but with technology. Fuzz pedals, wah-wah pedals, over super amplification, ramping up with new tubes, rotary speakers that would go behind him to echo and reverb the sound. And finally, when he made a little money, he took every single penny. He died broke at age 27. He accomplished all of this by age 27. He put it all into his studio, his own little place, his own little garage. Just like the high-tech guys did with their companies, in a garage. He called it his Electric Ladyland Studios, where he could experiment with new sound and new technology and new musical forms. That's what's truly great about the creative age. It wasn't a great scientist or a great inventor or a great robber baron that motivated one of the greatest computer minds of our time. It was a young black musician. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to your questions and to working with you guys in the future.
Thank you very much for that inspiring presentation. You mentioned that your plans are to stoke the creative furnace. Can you give us an idea what you're going to prod us with?
Well, I don't know. I often, it's so interesting, picking up the Noosa News and seeing like 4 stories on hair salons. It's really interesting. And I wrote my column for the Globe and Mail, Stoke the Furnace. I went to get my hair cut in Toronto. And the guy was cutting my hair. My hair was getting very long. I kind of looked like I did back in the 60s and 70s. And Rana said, you have to get a haircut. Went in there and I talked to the guy. I said, you're an American, right? I said, yeah. He heard my accent. He said, I used to live in America. I lived in Detroit. My wife Rana's from Detroit. He said, I used to work in Detroit. So I'm thinking he worked in a hair salon. He said, no, I didn't work in a hair salon. I worked for General Motors. Okay, and silly me. I'm very dumb sometimes. I thought, what factory did this guy work in? He said, I didn't work in a factory, guy. I was an engineer. I worked on all the product development for General Motors. I was a mechanical engineer. I hated it. I was bored to tears. So when the opportunity came to move to Toronto and be part of a hair salon, I jumped at it because I could be myself.